Pastor Rob McCoy, thanks for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, David. It's good to be with you.
Well, look, you're standing on the front lines. Tell me a little bit about, give us a little bit of the brief history as to what led up to this temporary restraining order that technically you have violated. And I want to know a little bit about what happened before and then what happened after today's hearing.
Well, who would ever thought you're standing on the front lines because you're going to church on a Sunday? That's a
Right.
strange one to me. Yeah. So this goes all the way back to April 4th, if you don't mind me taking you through the story.
Yeah, sure.
Uh, the governor basically, when the pandemic hit, and none of us knew about the severity of the virus, we were all very concerned. And the data was still coming out of China. During our Holy Week, the governor of our state, Governor Newsom, declares the church to be non-essential, but allows cannabis distributors, liquor stores, bicycle repair shops, realtors, they're all essential. And I don't argue with that. I do argue with the fact that he called the church non-essential. So we weren't even permitted to operate in that season during Holy Week. Uh, and it was the Palm Sunday was the first Sunday of the month is when we practiced the sacrament of communion. And he wouldn't permit us even to take communion, even if we followed CDC guidelines. And I just couldn't do that. It had nothing to do with endangering our community. We followed CDC guidelines, and the press came out in droves because everyone was declaring we're going to kill the entire community. And a sanctuary that holds 400 plus seats, we had 10 chairs,
Yeah.
and everyone wore masks, and all the elements were sealed. We sprayed everything down, and we cleaned the place top to bottom. The press came out, and to their credit, they covered it well and realized it was the cleanest place in Ventura County, if not California. You could have done an operation in there. And people waited in line 6 feet apart for hours to take communion.
Mm-hmm.
And we followed that process. And then we were waiting to reopen the church on May 31st, which was Pentecost Sunday. And I told the sheriff that we were going to open. We would follow the social distancing. The governor said 100 people or 25%, whatever's less. So we had to do 5 services to accommodate his order, and you had to sign up. And I told the sheriff we'll be abiding by it because the sheriff had to send deputies down to Los Angeles because the Black Lives Matter riots were happening.
Yeah, right.
Well, so we do that service, and then the governor comes out and embraces the Black Lives Matter protests. He says, I'm backing you. And it's absolute pandemonium. 75% of the businesses destroyed in Los Angeles with looting, and they were forced closed by the governor. 75% of the businesses that were destroyed were Jewish businesses.
Hmm.
It was a hate crime. They devastated our city, and the governor embraced it. And at that point, we said, this has nothing to do with the virus. We've done 130 nightly live streams educating the congregation. We've had no less than 7 doctors, 2 psychologists. We've looked at the data of bcemergency.com, which is the county numbers.
Mm-hmm.
We're watching the curve drop. Everything about this pandemic is organized and directed towards one specific group of people, 65 and older with comorbidity.
Right.
And we knew this, and the data proved it. And then we had doctors pointing out that there's medicines to address it. And we were a highly educated congregation. We watched the curve drop in Ventura County, and we realized that the death rate in Ventura County, 850,000 people, the death rate for COVID-19, 1/100th of 1%. And in addition, for those who've contracted it, which is a little over 8,000, and we've tested almost 17% of our population. So you can project the data, polling, the numbers aren't going to change.
Right.
Of this 17% of our population we've tested, over 8,000 have proven positive. So even if you take the number of deaths, which is now in the 90s, it still is less than 1% of those who've contracted it with a death rate.
Right.
And we know who it is. They're older people. No one under 30 has died. What have we done? And what is our supervisory board done? They've shut our schools, destroyed our businesses. 65% of the restaurants in our county will never reopen. They've devastated us.
Wow.
They've released criminals into our streets, and now they're coming to prosecute a church. Because on May 31st, after that Sunday, we said, we're open. We're open. And we began to host services for 4 months with not one case reported from a congregant to a pastor in our church or any elder. We know of no one in our congregation who's come to us that says they've contracted COVID-19. Not
Right.
one. We have ionization machines, UV lights. We're mindful, but there's no social distancing, no mask, because we've looked at the data. Social distancing is irrelevant. Masks don't seem, it's a 50-50 when you look at the peer-reviewed data.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're frustrated. And so these supervisors vote, and only 3 of the 5 voted. It wasn't even unanimous, and it was totally partisan.
Mm-hmm.
And they were
Mm-hmm.
just upset we were violating their order because they're impudent. They just are so frustrated by us. So they push and they get an attorney, they spend county money, and they come after us, and they get awarded a emergency temporary restraining order, which of course we were in contempt of. We violated it.
Mm-hmm.
And and then now they're coming after us again.
So, where does it go from here, Pastor? What's going to exactly happen from this point in the next few weeks? What are you expecting?
Well, the contempt of court could result in jail. Certainly, there'll be a fine affiliated with it. To the amount, I don't know. I've been told $10,000 or higher, or even jail time. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But the order itself was very draconian, because not only did they name me in the restraining order, they stated 1 to 1,000 congregants or visitors to
Right.
God Speak Calvary Chapel. And not just coming in the building, outside in the parking lot, anywhere where we're meeting, anywhere in the county, including unincorporated areas where we're not practicing safe distance or masks. They'll cite 1 to 1,000 unnamed, what they call does, whether congregants or visitors. And
Getting a getting a citation for going to church.
yeah, and citations aren't, you think, oh, this is just a misdemeanor. No, it's the equivalent of a drunk driving thing on your record. You have a concealed carry permit, you lose that. You're in the military, you have a problem now with promotion. If you're a student with an NROTC scholarship, you could lose it. These are serious things that the county wants to enforce on worshiping citizens whose businesses they've destroyed, whose children they've traumatized. We haven't been able to visit our loved ones in the hospital. We haven't been able to do weddings or funerals. I mean, it's draconian for a virus that is proven deadly to a very clear segment of people. And those are victims that are tragic. I don't dismiss
Right.
those.
Right.
But you don't quarantine the healthy, you quarantine the sick. And they
Mm-hmm.
destroyed everything. Graduations have been ruined, proms have been ruined. Their whole lives have been traumatized. This is awful. And they're not even talking about the emotional issues connected with this. There's a 5 times greater suicide rate when churches close. You should have churches open during a pandemic. People are depressed. Alcohol consumption up 150%. Calls the suicide prevention hotline up 1,000%.
Right. And my understanding here is that the church, Godspeak, and other churches can do other services, right? They just can't worship, basically.
Well, the governor said, first of all, you can't sing. You
Yeah.
can't, and you can't meet indoors. You have to go outside. And I got a kick out of that, because everyone's saying, well, Pastor, why don't you care about your neighbor and meet outside? Where are we going to go with 1,500 people?
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, we've received death threats. We have protesters out here. We have a
Dangerous.
secure building on private property we can control the narrative of. We have ionization machines and UV lights. We haven't had one case. And they want to take us and move us into a park that they can't declare where that is or how it's going to accommodate us.
Mm-hmm.
And here's the other kicker. We declared to the judge, we have ADA, a disability act. We have a pastor on staff who has a serious sun allergy. He will literally die if he's in the sun for an extended period of time.
Right.
And they dismissed all of that. And you know why they want
Yeah.
churches outside?
Hmm.
I'm a
Why is it?
talker, so you got to stop.
No. Tell me why.
They want churches outside because they realized they didn't have a leg to stand on when they embraced the BLM riots.
Mm-hmm.
And the 14th Amendment, equal application of the law, they had to say, well, okay, churches can meet, but outside, just like the rioters.
Mm-hmm.
Really?
What kind of victories did the judge give you? These are some small victories, but temporarily at least. I know there was this thought about maybe even starting to do raids on the church inside. I mean, what did some of the county folks want to do exactly, and what did the judge decide?
Well, the judge decided that the contempt hearing wouldn't be this Friday to give our counsel time to prepare. They just wanted to,
Mhm.
no due process. They just wanted to get me in front and get me out of the way and close the church.
Mm.
They wanted to make an example. This was written by a neuro, and the judge declined that. And they couldn't find anyone to enforce this draconian measure, so they wanted to force our sheriff's deputies to do it. We had sheriff's deputies present on Sunday, but they weren't there to arrest us. They were worshiping with us.
Huh.
We have a great sheriff in this county, and that these supervisors draconianly with, their tyrannical power, they want these deputies who've sworn to defend the Constitution forced to invoke an order that is just atrocious. So this letter was written by a neurosurgeon in Ventura County, and he sent it to a friend of mine, and the friend copied me on it. And I was really moved by it. He said, and I don't know if this neurosurgeon's a believer. I don't know who he is. I know my friend, and I know this isn't made up. But he wrote, I cannot believe that Ventura County really wants the optics of tyrannical suppression of freedom of religion on the national stage. These three supervisors are so blinded by their arrogance that they do not see that the data demonstrates that this church is not an epidemiological threat to the public.
Mhm.
They're just upset that their authority and power has been threatened, and that they will now look like impudent fools if they do not follow through with their threats. But the supervisors look so ridiculous, threatening to send in armed sheriffs to stop a church service while protesters are stopping off at the Wood Ranch barbecue restaurant for a sit-down dinner down the street after their exhausting, crowded rioting. Ventura County is on the wrong side of history on this one. And then he quotes from Sun Tzu, Art of War. He says, know the end result of the battle before you let the first arrow fly.
Yeah. Yeah. So that kind of speaks, Rob, to this idea of hypocrisy. You got the BLM and the protests and knock yourself out and don't worry about the mask. And hey, if it's for a good cause, forget COVID. Oh,
Oh, it's worse.
worshiping God, whole different matter. I mean, this has become shockingly political and maybe even worse than just political. Yeah.
And that's on the national scene, even the statewide scene. But let's just go to Ventura County. You want to talk about the hypocrisy. This is fascinating. So you have 5 county supervisors. 2 of them vote in favor of us, 3 vote in opposition, right down party lines. But the person that they have selected to be the czar over the county is our Dr. Robert Levin, the medical officer, who is the one putting on these draconian restrictions. He's shutting breweries. Now, in California, I was an elected official. I resigned from my council position on April 4th when I violated the governor's order. I have to fill out a Form 700 with the Fair Political Practice Commission, FPPC. I have to list all of my assets and everything I own so that there's no conflict of interest as an elected official or an appointed official serving in government capacity. Dr. Robert Levin has owned a winery for 20 years in Ventura and has never listed it on his Form 700 while he's been shutting down breweries and restaurants. I mean, you want to talk about a conflict of interest.
Mm-hmm.
This is insane, and they know it. Yeah. And the last thing they wanted was the focus on that. And now it's happened.
So Rob, here's the bottom line question on all of this. Where are we going as a country? What has gone on specifically? I mean, today in America, this is happening. What's your concern as we move forward in a country? It seems like a lot of people are taking advantage of this situation. Never let a disaster never let a disaster go to waste, right? I mean, that's a crisis go to waste, if you will. That's the political mantra.
I think this is a gift from the Lord.
Hmm.
The church that has been lulled to sleep and has been complacent and causing the gospel to be myopic and truncated, where we think the entirety of our responsibility as a pastor is to get people to raise their hand to attest to the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ, to be saved by grace through faith, which is critical. But he didn't say make converts, he said make disciples. Right. And somewhere along the line, we lost the understanding of the purpose of the law. We think that the law is there to show us we can't keep it, so we're saved by grace. Well, we were saved by grace in Genesis 15 when Abraham believed God and it was accredited to him as righteousness. Mm-hmm. That's in Romans. So why did God give the law 430 years later? It says it in Galatians 3. The law is a school teacher. It's a guardian to keep us safe, protected. and point us to Christ until faith comes. But we don't engage in the public square establishing laws, the laws of nature and nature's God, and contending for that. And we've abdicated our responsibility in the public square. And liberty isn't man's idea, it's God's idea. And here's how I know that. 3 to 5 million Jews were in slavery in Egypt. They cried out to God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what man does. He enslaves other human beings because we're just selfish. And this oligarchy of a government enslaves 3 to 5 million people. They cry out to the judge of the universe, help us. He sends a deliverer by Moses, 10 plagues. And Pharaoh even says, who is God that I should obey him? Power makes you drunk. And of course, he relents. He sees that you don't take on a battle with God. The Jews are delivered. Pharaoh's armies drown. They get out in the wilderness. Clothes don't wear out. Shoes don't wear out. Food every day. Water every day. Miraculously, Moses goes up on Mount Sinai. God gives him a downloaded moral app. First 5 commandments, God. Second 5 commandments, relationship with each other. He comes down. When he comes down, they are in complete debauchery. Golden calf, party going on. He takes that moral law and he puts it in the center of the community. And here's the greatest miracle of all. 3 to 5 million Jews lived together for 40 years without a police force or a standing army.
Mm.
Only a moral people can govern a republic, and the church has been woefully silent because we've been content with people raising their hands and putting money in the bag. But we have to engage in the public square because this experiment in liberty, which is God's idea, it has to be defended by the churches. And we have to be the first to stand. And if we don't, Christ said, I've come that you would know the truth and the truth would set you free. The Apostle Paul wrote in Galatians 6, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty for which Christ has set you free. He was in prison when he wrote that. Liberty is precious to God. And this nation was conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. 6,000 years of recorded history, every government's an oligarchy except for this little blip of time, 244 years. And this freedom we've been given, it's 4% of the population is responsible for the greatest achievements and the most accumulation of wealth the world has ever known. You go to any country in the world and you go to a skyscraper, that's because an American invented the elevator. Mm-hmm. You go to cities in the desert and those buildings can exist because an American invented air conditioning. You fly there on a plane that an American invented. We're on the internet right now because an American invented it. That's freedom.
So you see this act of what you're doing as not just civil disobedience, but obedience to God in a way?
I'm not being disobedient to anybody. I'm being obedient to God.
Right.
And the government is on his shoulders. And no government, no Caesar is greater than God. No government gets in the way of worshiping the one who created us. We're living on his dirt, breathing his air, drinking his water, and eating his food. And we're going to live by his rules. And he knows that governments are weak and that we're to submit to all authority. I'm not failing to abide by Romans 13. If people want to accuse me of that, it says that we're to honor those in authority. God's appointed them. There's no authority that hasn't been appointed but that which has been appointed by God. They're his instruments for our good. And then he goes on to say that they carry the sword, a weapon, and they're ministers of justice to execute wrath on those who would do evil. I believe that entirety of the passage, and they're there for our good. And the cool thing about being in a constitutional republic in America is we know who the authority is in Romans 13. It's found in the first 3 words of the preamble. We the people. They govern by our consent. And they're bound by a constitution they're not permitted to violate. The judge said, constitutional rights. I knew he didn't know it because there are no rights in the Constitution. The Constitution doesn't give us any rights. It is there to protect our inalienable rights from a government that would seek to steal them. And how do we defend ourselves from a government that gets more powerful? Well, we are given the sword as instruments, as ministers of justice. That sword is the Second Amendment. This is a fascinating form of government.
Yeah. Sometimes, go ahead, what were you going to say?
It's committed to freedom, liberty.
Yeah. Sometimes it can be hard to judge someone's motive, obviously, but with Gavin Newsom, how nefarious do you think how nefarious is all of this in your view as to what we know the politics, we know his politics, we know the state of California. How concerned are you that the motive behind this has a nefarious nature to it?
Well, I would encourage every pastor to serve in a civic position in some time in their life, because it helps you separate and understand that the gospel doesn't conflict with politics.
Mm.
What you come to realize is they're ideologically opposed to you, but you come to realize they're pretty cool people. And people aren't the enemy, they're the opportunity. And you contend in the public square for those ideas. But if you just back away and say politics is dirty and I don't do it, or I'm tired of voting for the lesser of two evils, that's lazy.
Mm.
But when you step into the public square, you meet some pretty amazing people that are trapped in bad ideology, and you love them into understanding. Love hopes all things. I call him Governor Mussolini, and I have fun with it. And I'd say it to his face, just jokingly.
Just
But the truth
jokingly.
is, no, I would.
I know you would.
visited
I know you would.
and I had fun with it. But and Shannon Grove, who's our Senate minority leader, she meets with the governor, and she has a love for that man. She prays for him. She's shared with him about the Lord and talk. You're calling it singing. It's worship. Governor, you don't understand with these people how important this is. And he doesn't know. But how will they know unless someone tells them? And so we label them as the enemy, and we consider them worthy of the fires of hell. I wouldn't wish that on my worst enemy. And I'm doing this because I want a guy like him to come to know the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fighting for him just as much as for you and everyone else. That's where a pastor is critical, because you don't start destroying people. Now, when they step over the line and they start using the sword they possess to suppress other people and hurt them, then you push back. But right now, I'm resisting with ideology. And I know that he has the ability to find me and imprison me. I'm good with that. And the cool thing about lions, that when you're put in a den with them and you're on God's side, they just don't have a taste for your flesh.
Hmm. You know, it looks like you're part of this new Black Robe Regiment. That's what it looks like. You got a pulpit. You got a pulpit.
Pulpit. I got a mouth on me, that's for sure. I'm Irish and Scottish.
Pastor Rob McCoy, thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it.
David, you are a blessing. Thanks, brother.